Hi Y12. This is the video on the poem Beachcomber. This is a lovely poem, very nostalgic, quite melancholic in lots of places, and it offers, I think, quite a nice change. Not a change in themes, it's talking about the similar themes that we've been looking at, themes of memory and nostalgia and time, but it's quite different structurally from a lot of the poems we've looked at, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. So this video is going to cover the first 3 stanzas, and then the second video will cover the final 2. So we'll start with the title as usual, which I've already highlighted there. So the title is Beachcomber. So beachcomber, concrete noun, and a beachcomber is somebody who spends time, it's like a hobby, you walk along the beach and you scour it for any particular kind of treasure. So it might be like really nice shells, or you could be looking for kind of artifacts like coins or bits of jewellery from kind of times gone by. So it's the act of scouring beach for treasure. And it's that idea, if you comb through something, you like separate it and look very carefully through it, combing your hair, separating it out carefully. So there's ideas here from the title of searching and looking for something. So I said treasure, not in a kind of pirate sense, but looking for something special. And it's an interesting title because the memory, this is a poem where the speaker as an adult is looking back on a memory they have of themselves as a child. It's quite a faint memory and they're trying to recall it in greater depth. There's a memory of them at the beach. So you've got the link to the beach there, but it's also then on a more thematic level rather than the story. Thematically, it's about the idea of when you're older, trying to search your memory for details, for specific memories of times and places and people, and how difficult that gets as you get older. So we've got a kind of thematic link to the rest of the poem from the title. So ideas of searching and looking very carefully for something that is special and something treasured. So we'll just read the first couple of stanzas. If you think till it hurts, you can almost do it without getting off that chair. Scare yourself within an inch of the heart at the prompt of a word. How old are you now? This is what happens. The child, and not in sepia, lives. You can see her. Comes up the beach, alone. Bucket and spade. In her bucket, a starfish, seaweed, a dozen alarming crabs caught with string and a mussel. Don't move. Troll. Go for the sound of the sea. Don't try to describe it. Get into your head. And then the platinum blaze of the sun as the earth seemed to turn away. Now she is kneeling. So that's the section we're going to look at in this video. So this kind of opening phrase explores the idea of memory. If you think till it hurts, you can almost do it without getting off that chair. So what's kind of foregrounded immediately in the poem is that there is some kind of pain associated with conjuring up these memories of childhood when you're older. So not the literal pain of thinking, rather the emotional pain that might bring up. So if you think till it hurts, the adjective hurts here. Oh, I should have highlighted that. There we go. Alludes to the emotional pain, sometimes conjured up by memories. They don't necessarily have to be painful or unhappy memories. Sometimes that emotional pain can be, happiness. Sometimes we get emotional when something is particularly important or we're feeling particularly happy. Some emotional pain, but not necessarily sadness. It can be happiness associated with looking back at a childhood when you're much older and that childhood is very far away. So the emotional pain could be a happiness at reliving the memory, or it could be sadness that that childhood is, as I said, so far away that those memories of being carefree and young are decades behind you and you're in a very different place in your life. So if you think till it hurts, you can almost do it without getting off that chair. So this image here, without getting off that chair. The image of the chair, I think, is one that sets the scene of this poem in old age. The speaker is in a chair, and we associate the idea of being perhaps housebound or at least partially immobile with being much older, kind of spending a lot of time sitting in a chair. So the image of that chair, so it's a noun phrase, sets the scene. So we know the speaker, or the persona, sorry, in fact either phrase is fine, the persona is old and is reminiscing. I still can't find my blue highlighter, so my AO2 is once again in yellow this time. And then we continue on in a similar theme to the idea of what we get from the word hurt by saying that sometimes these memories can scare you. So you scare yourself within an inch of the heart. Now, this poem plays around with language a little bit. There's a couple of places where a well-known phrase or idiom is slightly subverted or changed. And you get that here because usually you'd say scare yourself within an inch of your life, wouldn't you? That's the common idiom. But here it's scare yourself within an inch of the heart, which draws our attention to the bit that's changed, draws our attention to the heart. So I think symbolically the heart here is just confirming that these memories are something that the persona holds very dear, that it may be alarming in a sense to remember so clearly something which happened maybe 60, 70 years ago, but that it is very, very close to the heart of the persona. So symbolically these memories are treasured and they're important. But that you scare yourself. So this verb, scare, links up with the adjective hurts and shows us that there is something to be wary of in trying to recall treasured memories when you're much older. It can be quite emotionally painful. And I'm just going to add on here, I've noticed here I've got emotional pain or happiness or sadness, and we're just going to be specific and say that sadness in the poetic voice. A feeling of sadness as they look back at their childhood. There we go. And also memories are treasured and important to the poetic voice. Okay, and then, so you scare yourself within an inch of a heart at the prompt of a word. How old are you now? This is what happens. So we've got some interesting things happening structurally here. So we have the rhetorical question. And this opens up, rhetorical question, opens up the fact that this poem is set out like a dialogue between the persona as they are when they're speaking, so as an old woman, and their childhood self. They're trying to talk to their younger self. And this rhetorical question sets out that dialogue, kind of asking the question of the younger self. So rhetorical question sets out dialogue with her younger self. And this works on 2 levels, this particular one, I think, because how old are you now could be a question back to the little girl, you know, trying to place the memory that I remember being on the beach. Was I 3? Was I 4? How old are you? Or it could be a kind of internal monologue with themselves as an old person. How old are you now? How hard is it to recall these memories? So that works 2 ways for me. And then we have this is what happens, and then we have a hyphen. So this hyphen, again, structurally is indicating that we're about to enter into the memory. So structurally indicates the memory is about to follow. And there is predominantly, I'd say, slightly more to say about language than structure in most of the poems we've looked at so far, but in this one in particular, structure is really foregrounded, which makes it, as I said at the start of the video, quite interesting and a bit different. Now, I skipped over the bit that I want you to have a look at for your classroom's discussions, which is this bit here, line 5. You can scare yourself within an inch of the heart at the prompt of a word. So, the prompt of a word, I want you to think about that noun phrase and think about what that tells us about memory. If one word can prompt a memory, does that mean that memories are easy to recall? Does that perhaps suggest that they are maybe too easy to recall sometimes, possibly not for an older persona like we have in this poem, but generally speaking, what do you think that suggests to us about memory? So this is what happens. The child, and not in sepia, lives. Now you get this third person used about the persona as a child, so it doesn't say I and not in sepia live, which is what we would expect because they're referring to themselves. They talk about themselves in the third person. And the use of the third person often achieves very similar things in lots of different types of writing. It's usually a distancing technique, and that's what's happening here. We get distance between the persona as they are now as an older woman and themselves as a child. So they become the child, almost like it's not really them, that they've changed so much that they can't quite imagine that that was the same person. So this distances the persona from themselves as a child. And I think, to me at least, that's reminiscent of the pain that they perhaps feel in recalling that memory, that they're emotionally protected somehow if they almost imagine that it's a memory of somebody else, or it's somebody else as the child. So perhaps this is about the pain of recalling the memory. Or it could be slightly simpler, and it could just be that actually the memory is so faint that it doesn't really feel like them anymore. That the distance, the time that has elapsed is so great. So like I said, maybe they're talking 50, 60, 70 years, that actually it doesn't feel like them anymore. So the time so long. There is a natural distancing between the memory and themselves. So the child, they're recalling the memory. The child, and not in sepia, lives. Now, they say not in sepia because the memory that they are recalling is a memory. It's not looking at a picture. So perhaps there is a picture of this day at the beach that is in sepia. It's an old photograph, so it's got that kind of not black and white, but you know what sepia is, kind of yellowy black and white type picture. And by describing it as not in sepia, it suggests that it's more filled with colour, more filled with life than an image. So not in sepia. So the noun sepia is something old, and something often looks, I think, to me a little faded, but this memory is therefore fresh and alive because it is full colour and doesn't have that tint of sepia. So the child in Not in Sepia lives. Now this stanza draws attention to a couple of words by placing them on a line on their own, and if that happens you've got to assume that there's significance in those words. So the child in Not in Sepia lives. So this present tense verb lives. It's doing a similar thing to saying that the memory is not in sepia. The memory is so clear and so real that the child feels alive in that moment. It's not a faint and distant memory, it has been brought to life by the power of the persona trying to recall that memory. Their younger self lives in their mind. So it's just telling us that this is powerful memory. And they have brought something back to life. And in fact, I'm just thinking through that. Brought back to life suggests that something was once dead. And by recalling this memory, they're bringing back a dead childhood. So the childhood is therefore brought back. Persona's childhood. Okay. You can see her, comes up the beach alone, bucket and spade. So I would like you to think about why we have, I've just looked at lives being on its own. Why do you think the child being alone is significant? We think it is because structurally it's on a line of its own. And it's not linked with enjambment to the line before, so there is this pause, end line punctuation, and then we have even more focus on it. So why do you think it's important to highlight that the child in the memory is on their own? And they've got a bucket and spade, so it's just part of kind of fleshing out the memory there. In her bucket, a starfish, seaweed, a dozen alarming crabs, caught with string, and a mussel. Don't move, troll. So you've got this listing of what's in her bucket. A starfish, seaweed, a dozen alarming crabs. I don't think the list is particularly interesting, at least not to me, but I really like this description of the crabs as alarming. I think we almost slip into, because we're in the memory now, this to me slips into a childish poetic voice. You can imagine a child being slightly alarmed at perhaps this is the first time they've seen crabs, and then quite strange to a child the way they move and their pincers. So this adjective recalls for me a childish poetic voice. It could be the persona remembering that part of the memory and thinking, oh yeah, I was frightened of those crabs, I thought they were quite alarming, but they're echoing that poetic voice, so they're reliving the memory. And in doing so, they slip back into their old voice. So a dozen alarming crabs caught with string. And this is another place where Duffy kind of plays with language. A dozen alarming crabs caught with string and a mussel. Don't move, troll. So there's a play on don't move a mussel here, that idiom for being very, very still. But it's kind of subverted structurally, and we have the mussel as part of what's in the child's basket. So therefore we kind of focus on don't move. So we're going to explore this as part of the kind of playing around with language. So there's a couple of things here. Don't move is imperative, and there are an increasing number of imperatives as you go through the poem, and it's part of this dialogue between the poetic voice and her younger self. There's a sense in the imperatives of an attempt to hold that memory and to slip back into the past, to talk so directly and forcefully to her younger self. She's trying to go back in time. And don't move a muscle, you know, stay still, is that desperate attempt to keep the memory really, really clear. You know, memory ebbs and flows, doesn't it? Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it fades. And there is quite an emotional, I think, and melancholy attempt to just hold the memory for a little bit longer. So she speaks imperatively to her younger self. And to herself in the present as well, almost saying, just stay, asking the memory to stay still, not to move and to remain. So asking the memory to remain strong and not to start to fade away. And we'll also point out it kind of inverts the idiom, don't move a muscle. And why Duffy uses that kind of like playful subversion of idioms in this poem, I think is about the difference between her speaking as an adult, you know, when you have learned about language and you've learned about kind of common uses of phrase and you have gain the ability to subvert them and understand how language works, versus the kind of talking to a child who wouldn't understand that. It highlights to me the difference between the ages of the person in the poem and the persona. You might have a different interpretation about why she does it, but that's what it says to me. It highlights the difference in the ages of poetic voice and the child. And then you get this interesting end. Now I'm gonna do two things. I'm gonna ask you to think about it and I'm gonna give you my interpretation. So this stanza ends on the word troll, which isn't a word, and it's quite ambiguous what this might mean. Now, to me this is a little bit like the alarming crabs. I think this is a slipping into the childish poetic voice, and this is throw, like to throw something, but spelled to mimic the way a child might say it if they've not quite developed the you know, complete speech faculties. They might miss the H sound and just say tro. So to me this is misspelling to mimic the, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Phonetic, there we go, phonetic pattern of a child. And why would that be? I think it's about emphasising how deep they are in this memory, that they are remembering the sounds of childhood speech as well as childhood emotions. So I think that's about the strength of the memory. But I would also like you to have a little think. I think it's fascinating and quite ambiguous, so why end on T-R-O-W? Okay, final stanza for this video. Go for the sound of the sea, don't try to describe it, get it into your head, and then the platinum blaze of the sun as the earth seemed to turn away, now she is kneeling. So I'm going to pick up on something I was just saying there, an increasing number of imperatives, many in this stanza here. Go, don't, get. So that stands out as an opportunity to discuss some linguistic patterning, which is what I'm going to do. So we have pattern of imperatives, and it's a similar kind of analysis really to this imperative up here in don't move. To me this speaks of an attempt, a kind of desperation to maintain the strength of the memory, or here to kind of like flesh out and think of other things. So she can remember having the bucket, can she remember the sound of the sea, can she get it into her head? So to me there's a desperation to kind of continue to live in the memory, and for it to become wider and broader and to encompass other parts of the memory. And then you get this lovely structural bit here. And then the platinum blaze of the sun as the earth seen to, and then you get this gap, turn away. So I said earlier that memory is something which ebbs and flows. I'm just going to highlight these here. So memory is something which comes and goes. It can be strong or it can be faint. And here I think we've hit a run of particularly strong memory. So she's trying really, really hard, all these imperatives, talking to herself, get it into your head, and then something comes back to her, and you have this long line emphasising that she's suddenly kind of struck upon another aspect of this memory. The platinum blaze of the sun as the earth seemed to, and then what's happening is the memory is fading because you have this gap, seemed to turn away, and the memory disappearing is mimicked in the semantics of turning away, the memory's turning away from her. So I'm going to focus on this gap here. I would encourage you, if you've got some space, to think about why, this isn't the thing that I'm going to tell you to do, but just as an addition, maybe think about the blaze of the sun as the earth seemed to turn away. So we've got this space here. We're thinking graphologically and level 6 as well in the structure. This space emphasises that the memory is starting to fade. She had this strong pocket of memory, but now there's a struggle to continue it, which is emphasised by that gap there. But the memory is fading, and therefore the poetic voice is struggling to keep that memory. And now for this stanza, I want you to tell me why you think it ends with she's kneeling. So don't just tell me that it's what she's doing, i.e. she like kneels down in the sand, because that's what she remembers doing. But why put it at the end of this stanza? Why are we having our attention drawn to it? Is there something symbolic happening by the act of kneeling down? So we know that she's kneeling in this stanza, but why? Really, I'm interested in what you think about why it's at the end of this stanza. Therefore, why is it emphasised? Okay, that is our video for the first 3 stanzas.